Hello there, I'm John Corsine, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum and Park. And the last Civil War program I did was all about Ambrose Burnside's capture of Roanoke Island and the subsequent events that took place afterwards. So if you want to know more biographical information of some of these people, you need to go back to that blog. The blog for this program really takes their connected stories. I just couldn't do them all at once. So that said, you know, in 7 days from the time Burnside got through Hatteras Inlet and captured Roanoke Island, he also captured Elizabeth City, he captured Edenton, Plymouth, he closed the canals. In fact, his campaign was a tremendous success. Now, he was told by McClellan that what you need to do is you need to capture Roanoke Island, you need to capture Edenton, you need to then capture New Bern, then Fort Macon. And once you do those things, if you find it feasible, that's a great term that McClellan used to do. If you find it feasible, I want you to either move against Wilmington or to move against Goldsboro. And Goldsboro is on the Wilmington-Weldon Railroad, which is this railroad that is part of the Great Southern Railroad Network. And actually the railroad that goes through New Bern starts at Morehead City, North Carolina, and goes all the way up through New Bern and thence to Goldsboro. So you can see that this is a very important for the Union. They are stabbing a knife into the very heart of the Confederacy, and the Confederacy does not react very well towards that. Now, actually, in October of 1861, Daniel Harvey Hill is going to organize or attempt to organize the defenses of the inland seas, the North Carolina Sounds, and he considered New Bern as a critical port. At one time, it was the largest city in North Carolina. It once was the capital of North Carolina. And because of its location on the Neuse River, right near where it drops into Pamlico Sound and on the railroad, it is critical for the Federals to capture, just as it is critical for the Confederacy to stop them from capturing New Bern. So basically, Hill will lay out two defensive lines. The first one, which is really the best, is called the Croatan line, and it goes from Otter Creek off the Neuse River all the way over. There's Burnside, of course, and there we go. Okay, you can see where New Bern is. Right down here is where we are also going to go. This is Fort Macon. So you can see how important New Bern is. And so basically, D.H. Hill will build the Croatan line. Then 6 miles closer to New Bern, he will build another defensive line that goes from a huge earthwork on the water known as Fort Thompson and goes all the way to the railroad. Now, I got to tell you, Fort Thompson is going to have 13 heavy guns. 10 of them are facing the water. 3 of them are facing the landward side. Now, that is a difficult problem. But as the Confederates build their fortifications along the outside of New Bern, they are going to actually discover that they have to actually build even more. Now, this is going to be the second line, and right here is, oops, I shouldn't have done that. So you can see the Neuse River. Right there is Fort Thompson. They actually have several other earthworks going up towards the town of New Bern themselves. These are actually fairly well armed batteries that the Confederates built, and because they thought the Federals were going to make their attack against New Bern primarily by the river. And so the secondary defensive line is going to be this line that goes Fort Thompson across to the railroad. And then all of a sudden the Confederates go, wait a second, our flank is flying in the air. So they have to move it to here so that it is a connection that is very, very important for them. Now, the man, but if you notice, one of the problems with this defensive line, here's the original one. However, there's a dog leg back to this line of earthworks. So if you are a Union commander and figure this out, what do you want to do? You're going to go like this, okay? So we'll get into what happens. So the man, when D.H. Hill goes, they split the command of the North Carolina Sounds. Henry Wise is going to be in charge of the Northern Sounds. And this man, Brigadier General Lawrence O'Brien Branch, becomes the commander of the Southern Branch, which includes Pamlico Sound, Core Sound, Bogue Sound, and the various rivers. So it's a big area to defend. And what gives him the skills to do so? Well, if you look at his career, not much. He was born in Enfield, North Carolina, and when he was young, his family moved to Kentucky. However, his mother died, then his father died when he's 7 years old. So he's shipped back to North Carolina, where he's going to live with his uncle, John Branch. Now, John Branch is really an outstanding politician. He will be governor of North Carolina, Speaker of the House of Delegates for North Carolina, a member of the House of Delegates, and representatives, and guess what else? He is Secretary of the Navy. And young Lawrence O'Brien Branch will go with him to all these places. Actually, while John, the elder Branch, is in D.C., he will hire as a tutor for young Lawrence Salmon Chase. Now, you know who he is. He's in the eventually in the Lincoln administration, eventually becomes a member of the Supreme Court. So this guy's getting an outstanding education. So excellent. He will actually go to Princeton. And when he goes to Princeton, he'll graduate with honors. When he gets out of Princeton, he has a lot of money behind him. He's going to move to Tennessee, start a newspaper. He's an editor, brilliant writer. And then he comes back to North Carolina, and he will become a member of the House Carolina. Well, no, he becomes a member of the House of Representatives for 3 different terms. A great orator. However, his knowledge of military affairs have much to lack. And I have to say that's a shame. But when the war breaks out, he's of such high esteem, he will be named quartermaster and paymaster general of North Carolina troops. However, he doesn't want that. He will actually resign from that and become colonel of the 33rd North Carolina Volunteer Infantry Regiment. And then he's going to be named in November of 1861 a brigadier general and placed in command of the Pamlico district, basically. Now, this is really great because this you can see the forts once again. And we'll come back to this slide when we actually talk about the battle. And actually a great person who figures in this battle is going to be later governor of North Carolina, Zebulon Vance. Now, this man is the commander, and let me just say, in the defenses of New Bern, Vance commands the 26th North Carolina Regiment, one of the best trained regiments, primarily because his executive officer is Henry Burgwin. And Henry Burgwin, believe it or not, went to University of North Carolina. Okay. Then he goes to VMI, graduates from both schools. Then he goes and takes some special courses at West Point. And so, oh my gosh, Burgwin is really the backs Zet Vance very nicely. And so this man is Steven Rowan, the highest ranking Irish emigre in the U.S. Navy. He comes to the U.S. at age 7, and he goes to sea very early in his career. Basically, he will be a command of the gunboat flotilla under Louis Malchibres Goldsborough. But because, just remember, Roanoke Island falls February 8th. The Burnside is wrapping up everything days afterwards and weeks afterwards. And all of a sudden, by March 9th, he is ready, or March 8th, he's ready to go against New Bern. But Goldsborough is then called back to Hampton Roads, and so that he can try to deal with the CSS Virginia, leaving Rowan in charge. This man will eventually end up as a vice admiral at the end of his career. But he is really aggressive. And so he has his gunboats stationed outside of Hatteras Inlet when Burnside decides to make his major move. Now, I have to tell you, we want to look at this because we can see in this picture the various units. Here are the 26. Here's the 33rd, or 23rd, 33rd, and 37th. Now, these units were, organized a little earlier. However, this little company right here, right, is the 23rd. They are militiamen. They have been mustered for 2 weeks. They've got shotguns. They've got fowling pieces. They also, some of them just bring a Bowie knife. They think this is going to be okay. But if you notice, there's a brickyard right here. And this becomes the focal point of the battle because that's what the 23rd is going to defend. Right there are the brick kilns, and they are going to cut loopholes in them to add to the success. But this is a huge weakness in the Confederate line, and not only because there are no entrenchments there, look at that, but it's also because Branch puts the wrong troops there, and because they are militia with limited training. So we're going to see that they move their line farther out like this. That's thanks to Henry Burgwin saying, hey, we can't really have our flank up in the air, and so they want to these are swamps right here that are related to Bryce's Creek. And so basically that's kind of how the Confederate line is going to look. If you look down here, Burnside brings his 3 brigadier generals with him. Foster is going to have the job of going straight at the main part of the Union defenses. John Park is going to be in reserve, and Reno is actually going to carry the burden of the Union attack. So basically, I don't know what I've done, but okay. I messed up, I think. Somehow.
Fine, John. Just click away from that.
Okay.
And just
okay. Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I'm an airhead. So basically, Rowan is going to bring his squadron as close as he can to Fort Thompson. Now, the big problem is that the Confederates, right, had two rows of obstructions in the river that had been designed by Daniel Harvey Hill. The first one is about 1.5 miles below Fort Thompson, and they are basically stakes that are put in the water that you can barely see at high tide, and yet if your boat goes over them, it could sink your boat. Right behind those iron capped pilings are going to be 30 torpedoes, mines, that have 200 pounds of gunpowder apiece. Then behind that are another level of obstructions that are basically made out of sunken hulks. And then Hill had organized the placer of what we call civet de frise. In other words, pointy sticks coming out of the ships. And so those obstructions are supposed to move the Federal fleet closer to Fort Thompson so that Fort Thompson could take advantage of its fixed position. Now, so because the Army cannot bring its heavy artillery with it because of the bad weather, I mean, it rains all the time, it's going to be very important for the U.S. Navy to play a role in this campaign. Basically, Rowan will begin shelling the Croatan line to enable the Federals to land at Slocum's Creek below the Trent River. Now, that's all great. And as the Union troops advance, Rowan's going to introduce a new type of artillery firing, and that is called creeping barrage. So in other words, right ahead of as the Federal's troops are going, he's lobbing 9-inch shells, 100-pounder Parrott shells into the Confederate earthworks and right in front of the Union troops. In fact, Rowan, actually some of these projectiles fell near the advancing Union men, as one soldier said, splintering and cutting off trees, plowing great furrows in the ground, and he told his ships to fire as closely as he can to the advancing Federals. Well, of course, Burnside's going to complain, but Rowan will write Goldsboro, I commenced throwing 5, 10, and 15-second shells in the shore. Notwithstanding the risk, I was continued to continue until the general sent me word. I know the persuasive effect of a 9-inch and thought it better to kill a Union man or two than lose the effect of my moral suasion. Wow. So, this is a creeping barrage. So basically, the Federals land on May 12th. They move their way through the mud. Actually, the weather is so bad when the Union troops actually will bivouac. The mud is so bad, as one soldier, Richard Dollard, said, that the North Carolina soil, in conjunction with a good, vigorous rain, is a combination hard to beat. At best, it seemed as though when one got his foot stuck in the mud and attempted to get it out, it was a question whether the mud or ankle would give away. As Alfred Rowe of the 24th Massachusetts wrote, he penned this little ditty on the evening of March 13th. Now I lay me down to sleep in mud that's many fathoms deep. If I should die before I wake, just hunt me up with an oyster rake. Okay, so you got the conditions, the mud, but nevertheless, the Federals want to move forward, and that's exactly what they're going to do. The lead troops that are going to attack at New Bern are going to be the 1st Brigade, commanded by John Foster. You know, John Foster is working for Burnside, so that's why I think he has his Burnsides the way he does. But basically, as Foster begins his skirmishing towards the line, all of a sudden Branch goes, wait a second, I've got this empty dogleg in my line and I need to support it. So he'll send 2 24-pounder howitzers rushing over to the brickyard to try and help the militia defend that area. Now, I think that was not a very smart thing to do, because by the time they got there, you have to realize that Reno has launched his attack, and his attack for a good reason. He sees, even though you see there's fog, there's also the cannonading from Fort Thompson, from the gunboats, from the musketry of Foster's brigade and the defending Confederates. The smoke, because the wind blows over towards Reno troops, so they can barely see where they're going. But somehow, some people think it's by subterfuge. You know, the Union really moved against Eastern North Carolina because it was rumored that many of these Eastern North Carolinians were pro-Union. And so they were, it could have been that a undercover information was given to Reno about the weakness of the Confederate line, because when he attacked, he broke right through with one unit that was basically they broke through, but they are thrown back. At one time, the 23rd Massachusetts almost surrounded, and because the Confederates on each side of on the flanks of the militia troops, the 26th North Carolina, 33rd North Carolina, will turn their units so they can enflail fire against the Federals. And that means the Federals can't break through that line. Well, I want to tell you, Reno really thinks that, you know, he can do this, but he just needs more troops. And so Park's brigade, the 3rd Brigade, is coming up, and he actually will go to a man known as Isaac P. Rodman. And Rodman, there he is. He is with the 4th Rhode Island, and they said, you got to help. And so Rodman sends a message to his commander, John Park, saying, hey, I need to do this. I hope it's okay with you. So, you know, boom, in comes these fresh troops. I've got to tell you that it breaks the Confederate lines. Once you break through those Confederate lines, you are, here's John Park, you are actually, they break through. That means they can enflail the flanks of the 26th, 33rd, and the rest of the Confederate lines. So the rout begins when the 23rd Militia breaks and runs away from the this is an inaccurate picture because they tried to put too much stuff together. There was no earthwork, but the North Carolinians did not run away from this section of the line, the 33rd. But this kind of reminds me of what the militia are doing. We are skedaddling, and that's what they do. And once they skedaddle, everyone else starts to fall back, and you know, only Henry Burgoyne can keep the 26th North Carolina in some type of order. The 33rd and the 7th North Carolina, when they get across the Trent River Bridge, what are they going to do? They're going to burn it. So the 26th North Carolina is isolated, so they have to cross Bryce's Creek, which is a swift moving creek, and to get to safety. The Confederate troops do not settle down until they make it to Kinston, North Carolina, 30 miles away. So just imagine that this battle is in the balance, even though the Confederates have 4,500 men, Burnside has 11,000 men. But the Confederates, because of their line, the strengths of their line are able to hold. However, the weakness of their line is going to cause their command to collapse. I mean, the brick kiln, the brickyard is a swirling mass of combat. And finally, thanks to Rodman's 4th Rhode Island, they will break through. Basically, let me go to that later. But, Rowan wants to be the hero. And actually, he's going to write Goldsboro after the battle. It was really the Navy that won the day because we were firing shells into the rear of the Confederate lines. And so, but the Army's always going to try to take credit. But just remember, the Navy did it. Because what Rowan does is he's going to pass the obstructions under fire from the seaward side of the Fort Thompson and Fort Dixie, and they go around the obstructions. Some ships go too close to the obstructions. The Commodore Perry struck one of the iron stakes and carried the head of it off, stuck in its bottom, believe it or not. And the Commodore Barney will go over one of the obstructions and it will cut a hole in the hull that is 6 feet long. And you can imagine they have to patch that as they're moving. And then the Stars and Stripes also was injured by those obstructions. However, none of the torpedoes work. And so the Federals then bring their ships up to the second line of obstructions, or their ships, and basically Rowan makes sure that every one of the Confederate batteries are going to be annihilated, or the troops sent out, and then he is going to take possession of the town of New Bern before the Army gets there. And basically what he finds in New Bern is an amazing cachet. As he wrote, possession of an immense amount of stores, arms, munitions, vessels, and cotton, and lots of pitch and tar. And I got to tell you, if you're a naval officer and crew members that capture these goods, they will adjudicate them, sell them, and you get prize money. So this is happiness for Rowan. And then he says the town is an immense depot of Army fixtures and manufacturers of shot and shell and carriages. That's what made New Bern so important for the Confederacy. Number one, if you get up the Neuse River, your final stop is going to be, well, you get to go through Kinston, and then you get towards Raleigh. You get to control the railroad, the Atlantic North Carolina Railroad, which means you got the ability to reach towards the Wilmington and Weldon Railway. So this, as I've said, this campaign, the Confederate leadership in Richmond fails to do anything. Actually, Branch writes Robert E. Lee, then advisor to Jefferson Davis, I need men. And Lee writes back, says, if I had more men, I need to keep them here, so I can't help you. So what's going to happen is the Confederate High Command does not recognize the importance of this region. 1/3 of the wealth, 1/3 of the agricultural products, and 1/3 of the population is all where? Eastern North Carolina. The richest county in North Carolina is Hyde County. So once you capture these areas, that commissary, that foodstuffs that used to go up to Norfolk, now the Union have, and the Confederates are denied those resources. Well, so now what we have to do is Burnside says, now we're going to go after Beaufort and Fort Macon. Now, basically, he keeps Foster's brigade at New Bern. He then sends Reno's brigade up to the, believe it or not, the Great Dismal Swamp Canal with Rowan's gunboats, and they will actually try to capture South Mills Lock and control Camden, North Carolina. This will result in Reno being defeated at the Battle of South Mills on April 1862. And he's defeated by a small group of Confederates. And, you know, it's really kind of amazing. And Reno retreats. Reno says, I don't want to be here for the glory of the Navy. And my men are not used to these conditions of heat and humidity and muck. And the Passaquank River is a winding, irregular river ready for traps at any time. So the Reno diversion, trying to get to not only the Great Dismal Swamp Canal and the South Mill locks, but there's also a dead shot to go to Norfolk. But they failed to do that. Now, so Beaufort, North Carolina is one of the oldest communities in North Carolina. It is one of the state's best deep water ports, although nothing is real deep water in North Carolina, but Beaufort Inlet's at 14 feet. And of course, then you have Wilmington. So actually, Beaufort is taking all these goods from Eastern North Carolina, and they're able to transship them. That's why they bring the Atlantic North Carolina Railroad down to a new town that was created known as Morehead City. Morehead City is not named a town until 1858, but it's rapidly growing. And right next to it is a hotel in a community called Carolina City. And it's not a city. You know, when the Federals come down there heading to Carolina City, when they get to Carolina City, they said, you know, 10 buildings don't make a city. So you can imagine. But it was a hotel was there, as during the summer you want to get to the cooling breezes. I have to tell you that Burnside now is going to have to complete his control of Eastern North Carolina. He's going to have to take what is known as Fort Macon. And you can see Carolina City, Morehead City, and Beaufort. You can see the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad. And so basically, this is called Core Sound. So this is the great defender of Beaufort Inlet, which in the old days was called Old Topsail Inlet, right? Because it was a hot trace of transfer for pirates. That's actually where Blackbeard wrecked his ship. Blackbeard actually had a home in Beaufort, believe it or not. Blackbeard, bad boy. But you can understand the growth of Beaufort as a community. This pentagonal fort was designed to mount 56 guns, and they would be mounted in parapet, and also in the outer work is also in parapet. This is called the citadel of the fort. And these right here are for 24 pounders, and these are called campanaries, that are where riflemen stood in case the enemy gets over this first line of defense, they can still hold their fort. Now, this fort was built to replace Fort Hampton. That was built in 1709 after the Chesapeake Leopard affair. And, you know, it's made out of brick. It is partially designed by Brigadier General Simon Bernard. And actually, they weren't going to build it, but the senator from North Carolina is going to be a man known as, well, this is more of the fort. You can see looking right out over here is the sea. Right over here is Beaufort Inlet. And you can see how they have caponera. So if the enemy gets into this dry moat, then they're going to be shot at in a protected position, by a protected position. So it was a fairly effective fort. However, it's going to be started in 1826, and then it's going to be garrisoned beginning in 1834. However, very quickly, it becomes a backwater fort. In fact, they'd send inspectors there every so often. By 1843, there are no artillery units assigned to Fort Macon. Actually, Fort Macon is going to be maintained by an ordnance sergeant. And so that's going to be pretty, because of that, because it's not maintained, many of the guns were taken away. In fact, there were only 4 cannon mounted at the beginning of the Civil War, and they were situated on carriages that were rotten woods. The archways were crumbling in casemates. Wooden supports, iron supports are rusting. So this fort is rotting from lack of care. And so in essence, they will want to this is 8-inch Seacoast mortar. These are the mortars we're going to talk about in the siege. I'll come back to them. This is a 30-pounder Parrott. This gun is the very style gun that's going to put the end to what are called brick fortifications. Because, as you know, with a rifled shot, spins into the woodwork or the brickwork and creating a terrible hole. The first commander of Fort Macon, Fort Macon is going to be captured by a group of militiamen when Fort Sumter falls. Actually, a militia unit under the command of Josiah Parker comes from Beaufort, goes on to Fort Macon, and said, "We capture you for the state of North Carolina." Now, this is 14 April. North Carolina doesn't leave for a month later, the Union. And so, but they don't care. They capture it, and all theirs is Ordnance Sergeant, who's married to a woman in Beaufort. So he says, "Okay, I give up." Not much he could do. So then the first commander is going to be this man, Lieutenant Colonel John L. Bridgers. Bridgers was actually fought with the 1st North Carolina Regiment at the Battle of Big Bethel. He plays a pretty major role in defeating one of the Union attacks. And so basically, he begins to make repairs and other things, but he does not have the skills, inherent skills, to really be a military engineer. And that's what they want. And so he is going to be replaced by this man, and this man is Moses White. And he will replace Bridgers as commander of Fort Macon on October 5th, 1861. He's a native of Vicksburg, Mississippi. He will attend the College of William and Mary 2 years, 1854 to 1856, and then, he will attend William and Mary 52 to 54, and then he'll eventually go to West Point, where he'll graduate in the class of 1858, in the upper level of his class. So he will be named ordnance to the Ordnance Corps, and so he knows all about defensive works. He knows all about cannons, so he is a really great selection. However, take a look at him. He barely, the uniform looks like it's 2 sizes too big for him, and basically he's a very sickly individual, and he is an epileptic. So that's not very good in command, but the people at Fort Beaufort, all the troops, they love him. Nevertheless, he renewed the enthusiasm for the fort. And so he is going to secure and mount 53 guns, including 2 10-inch and 5 8-inch Columbiads, 19 24-pounder howitzers, 32 32-pounders. Of those 32-pounders, 10 are called carronades, short barrel for short action. And then they have 6 field pieces, 12-pounder. Now, 4 also of those 32-pounders are going to be rifled. And so this gives the defenders of Fort Macon a pretty good feeling. Now, Moses knows he's going to be besieged after the fall of Rhode Island. So he gathers 7 months' supply of food. He gathers all the ammunition he can, but he doesn't get enough gunpowder. He only has 30,000 pounds of gunpowder, and one of the magazine the gunpowder is stored in is damp, so the gunpowder gets damp, and so he really only has sufficient gunpowder to actually keep up a major fight until 3 days are up. So they're at a disadvantage. So basically, the fort is there. It is reinforced. Actually, White will take the 4 carronades and he remounts. One of the problems is that Fort Macon doesn't have these. These are mortars. Mortars are assigned to coastal defense works because if they're going to be being besieged, they can lob the shell behind the fortification, earthwork in most cases, and disrupt the building of the fortification. So he doesn't have any, so he has to be makeshift. And what he does by creating these carronades that are angled at 40 degrees so that they then can come up high and do a burst over the Union fortifications. They actually take one of their 10-inch Columbiads, which is on a pindle mount facing the inlet, and they will turn it around, and with small powder charges, they'll send shells that arc up and explode over the Union fortifications. Does that help? No, it does not help. So, what are we going to do? So, anyway, White is actually going to help the CSS Nashville. Now, remember, the Federals are coming down. There is the famous commerce raider Nashville that's actually in Beaufort or Morehead City. And when they figure out the Federals are on the way, the commander at that time of the Nashville is Lieutenant William Conway Whittle. And so he is determined he's not going to let this famous ship, this fast ship, 14 knots, to be taken by the Federals. So he goes across Bogue Sound and he anchors under the guns of Fort Macon. Whittle will go meet with White, and White will say, oh, yes, I don't think you're going to be able to escape. There are those Union blockaders out there, and what I think is that you should just burn your vessel and let your crew become members of my garrison. Whittle says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he says, I am determined to get out to sea. So, late afternoon of March 17, 1862, Whittle will move his ship out away from Fort Macon and into the inlet. Now, he told Moses White not to fire any of his guns. Actually, many of the blockaders had moved away. There were only 2 ships guarding Beaufort Inlet, right? And it's the Cambridge, which you see to the left of the screen, and the Gems book to the right of the screen. Now, basically, the Cambridge is a steamer. The other one is a sailor. And so the big issue is going to be that how Whittle gets out is he heads straight for the Cambridge. Now, he looks like the state of Georgia, which is a Union blockader. So at first, the Federals don't pay attention, but all of a sudden, Whittle says, the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head straight for the Cambridge, and that ship will yield, or I'll destroy it and destroy my own ship. Well, the Cambridge yields, because at first it thinks the state of Georgia. As the Nashville passes, oh my gosh, we made a mistake. They fire at it. Don't do a very good job. The Nashville will go on to continue its career for about another year. Now, and as the ship passes, the garrison is cheering. They now have great hope that, yes, we're going to be able to hold this region for the Confederacy. But don't talk so fast, because by the 21st of March, John Grubb Park, graduate West Point class of 1849. All these guys were at West Point with Burnside, and Park has sideburns just like Burnside. So, it was a great thing. So basically, he moves his command down to first Carolina City. Then they will occupy Morehead City. And this is they occupy Carolina City and Morehead 21st of March. However, the citizens of Beaufort says, look, if you come and capture us, the guns at Fort Macon are going to destroy our town. And Parker says they won't do that. And so they occupy the town on the 25th, the night of the 25th. And so at that moment, Park sends a message to Colonel Moses White and saying that, it's time for you to surrender. And he uses the term, he wants to save the unnecessary effusion of blood, and advised that he had intimate knowledge of the fort. And both he and Foster had been inspectors of the fort prior to the war. So did they know what the fort was all about? Yes. And were they able to take advantage of the fort's weaknesses? The answer is Park is going to be able to do that. So White will write back, I have the honor to decline evacuating Fort Macon, period. And when he tells his officers and men that they're going to make a stand, they all cheer. And one of them writes this: if Lincoln wants to save his bacon, he better stay away from old Fort Macon. Oh my gosh, that was real nice, but it really wasn't going to do for the Confederates very well. So Park now knows he has to organize a formal siege. And so this is Henry Burgoyne. Burnside is going to actually come down to Beaufort on the 21st of April, but in between the 25th of March and 21st of April, Park is going to be very busy building his lines to bombard. He will at night move his troops over to Hope Hole Creek, and which is a bunch of marshes. They have to carry their stuff up to land. They then march towards the fort. When they get within 2,000 yards, they're Confederate pickets, they're a little skirmish. But what Burnside had told Park is use those sand dunes as your earthworks. And so basically, that's what they end up doing. I have to tell you, the first people who are effective in this, because where is Park going to get his cannon? The cannon are all up near New Bern, so they bring them down the river. They got to cross to this one landing that had not been burned at Havelock, North Carolina. They then put the stuff on the railroad, but the Newport River Railroad Bridge had been destroyed by the Confederates, and the 4th Rhode Island actually rebuilt it in a matter of 4 days. So Park is going to be in a great position. Now, there's several different skirmishes. The first is 11 April, then another one on 12 April. And basically, this brings the Confederate infantry within 1,200 yards of the fort, which is good for the Federals, because behind them, we're going to build 3 batteries. And these batteries are going to be, number 1, the Flagler Battery, which has 4 10-inch mortars, which sits 1,680 yards from the fort. Now, I got to tell you, these guns are pretty effective. Actually, a 8-inch mortar weighs 930 pounds. A 10-inch mortar weighs 2,225 pounds, and a 30-pounder Parrott gun weighs 1,670. Wait a second. They weigh 4,200 pounds. They have a range of 1,670 miles of yards. So in essence, what we're doing is we're laying in within the dunes these mortar positions, because they have to put wood down. They have to really hold the sand dunes in place with sandbags. And those mortars, the Confederates can't see them building them, but they're going to be able to shoot over the dam and into Fort Macon. The real issue is going to be at Morris Battery, because they have 3 of these Parrott rifles, and Parrott rifles throws a pretty heavy shell, and actually that would be the Morris Battery. And so they have it all prepared, but they're going to have to cut embrasures in the sand dune so they can fire this trajectory of the 30-pounder Parrott. Well, I got to tell you that the next battery is going to be even closer to the fort, 1,200 yards from the fort, and that is going to be the Pruckty Battery, 8-inch mortars, and the Confederates don't even really know those mortars are there. And so basically, Burnside comes down to back down to Morehead City, and he will basically organize. He'll bring with him 2 floating batteries, but he actually demands surrender on the 23rd. White refuses, and so the bombardment will ensue. And the bombardment starts on the afternoon of the 25th of April, or the morning of the 25th of April. The Union is all ready by the evening of the 24th to bombard. Now, so as the Federals begin their bombardment, the U.S. Navy has a little flotilla outside of Beaufort Inlet under the command of Commander Samuel Lockwood, and he has the USS Daylight, a screw steamer with 4 22-pounder, 32-pounder guns. The USS State of Georgia, a side wheeler with 6 8-inch shell guns, 2 32-pounders, and 1 30-pounder Parrott gun. And then the USS Chippewa, that is a 90-day gunboat with 1 11-inch Dahlgren, 2 24-pounders, and 2 20-pounder Parrott guns. So what they do is they're going to actually attack. They're going to attack the. Here you go with the Daylight. There's the State of Georgia, and there's the Chippewa. So what they're going to do, there they are right there. And so they try to force their way at the very beginning of the bombardment, so that, they can actually win the fort, they think. Well, the seas are real choppy. So when they get in there, guess what happens? They don't have a secure platform, and the Confederates do. And so they force the fleet to retreat. The Confederates think, oh my gosh, we won the day, great cheering comes. However, I have to tell you, the Federals had figured out signaling. So a flagler is going to work with another lieutenant so that at Beaufort, he's up at the top of the Beaufort Hotel, and he's sending signals about where the shells are landing. So by 12:30, the shells are landing either into the side of Fort Macon or hitting on the parapet to knock off the M. Barbette cannon. And so actually 1 30-pounder shell knocks the wheel off of 1 Confederate gun, smashes the carriage of another one, and then falls down and lodges in the brickwork. Actually, if you go to Fort Macon today, you can see that shell stuck in the side of the interior brick wall. Moses White should have known all about this, because Burnside had told him, on the 23rd, well, 10 days before that we had captured Fort Pulaski, much stronger fort than this, defending on Coxburg Island, defending Savannah. And the end result is going to be we destroyed the fort. And so we're going to do that to you. And that's exactly what's going to happen. They create so much damage. Now, actually, Park knows exactly where the main magazine is. So they focus their artillery at the main magazine. The end result is 4:30 on the afternoon of April 25th, Fort Macon will surrender. Now, Park says we want you to surrender unconditionally. Burnside, however, had offered, we'll parole you, let you go home. Guess what happens? Burnside says, let's do that for them. And so the garrison leaves and the Union take over. I have to tell you, the capture of Fort Macon completes this Burnside expedition. The main goals: capture Roanoke Island, capture the entrance to the canals, capture Plymouth, capture New Bern, capture Beaufort and Fort Macon. So notice Burnside is in the cat seat. And so basically, he now plans to move against Goldsboro. However, he doesn't get his men organized until late June. And believe it or not, because McClellan needs reinforcements, Burnside has to stop his movement against Goldsboro and move his troops back to Virginia. That means that Goldsboro will not be captured. The Federals come within 40 miles of destroying the Confederacy by breaking the railroad lines in North Carolina. So basically, Burnside had a very successful campaign, and I thank you all for paying attention today. I'm sorry I went a little long. It's a big story that happens to me all the time, So anyway, if you want to ask any questions, you're welcome to. You might have already sent in some questions. You can email questions to me. You see my email address. And so I'll think about it, like William Jeffers. That's not me, by the way. And so I have to remind everyone every time. Someone asked me after one of the first ones we did, says, why did you put your picture there? And I went, oh, God, you dummy. So anyway, what questions do we have, Julie?
We do have a few, and that is not meant to look like you, John. That was nothing personal.
Thank you.
Marie asked, the picture you showed of the 10-inch mortars shows them lying on a group separate from the carriage. How did they lift and mount them to the carriage? Seems like it would have been a significant effort.
Yes, it was, and they use block and tackle. They actually picked them up and put them back down. There's an iron strap that would put them into place. So it's a really laborious, these things weigh, they're very heavy. And so we don't have mechanical cranes. So you got to use block and tackle. There are lots of pictures from the war that show how they did that. So moving the guns, they would use a limber, which they then would put the tube or the carriage on and move it with a mule team, believe it or not, and through mud and sand. It was a very, it took Park a whole month to get ready to bombard Fort Macon, even though he's already on Bogue Bank by, the April, he first gets his troops out there on April 25th. Okay, so that's how they did it.
Okay, thank you. Steve asked, why does Burnside do fairly well in this theater, assuming that's true, and so terribly at Fredericksburg?
Well, there are a couple of reasons, in my opinion. Number one, Burnside had a small command, 12,000 men, and he divided into three brigades, all who were friends of his. So, they didn't, I don't mind Burnside being the commander. They all were happy. They worked together like Nelson's band of brothers. They understood. Then Burnside's going to be successful because he's got, you ready for this? He has the gunboats. The gunboats give him mobility. The whole idea or concept of McClellan, the Peninsula Campaign and so forth, is to move your troops, interdict them between the strengths of their enemy. That's exactly what they do. The Confederate High Command refuses to accept the strength of the Confederate soldiers in North Carolina. There's not enough of them. There are not enough cannon. Actually, there's enough time between the fall of Roanoke Island for the Confederates to really defend New Bern. They could have brought troops down and they could have defeated the Federals there. But in no place did Burnside face a command of more men than he, nor in better defensive positions. That's exactly what happened to him at Fredericksburg. At Fredericksburg, he relies on, his corps commanders to really orchestrate the attacks, and they make the mistakes. But so does Burnside. Burnside knew when he was named commander of the Army of Potomac that he says, that's not a job for me. I can't do that job. It's above my brain power. I don't know exactly what he says. He tells that to Lincoln. And Lincoln says, well, then I'm going to have to give the command to Joe Hooker. Well, Burnside hates Joe Hooker. Hooker hates Burnside. And as a result of that, Burnside says, well, I'll take the job, because he didn't want to work under Hooker. So basically, his failed performance at Fredericksburg sees Burnside gets sent out west, where he does rather well, siege of Knoxville, and so he'll be brought back to Virginia for the Overland Campaign after the successful siege of Chattanooga, and he will then do poorly during especially the Battle of the Crater, and so he'll stay in command, but he is not a reliable corps commander anymore. Once again, he was a great divisional commander, great with a focus of what he's to do, especially when he has superior equipment and mobility over the enemy. He can take advantage of it. He's not a dumb person, but he's just does not have the sense of tactical and strategic situations like many others would have.
Well, following on that critique or analysis of Burnside, Barry is asking, how much involvement did Burnside himself have in the assault of New Bern?
Well, he's there. He actually rides to the front of the Union lines early on, and actually sharpshooters fire at him. Right. And so they say, you got to get behind here. So he is there at the battle. He's the guy that says, Foster, you're going to do this. He's the guy that tells Reno to go there. And so he is the guy that keeps Park in reserve. So he's there at the battle. At Fredericksburg, he's in this great Chatham House. He can see the entire battlefield. It's just that he's commanding too many troops for his own good, and he doesn't really force some of his commanders like, William Buell Franklin does a terrible job on the Confederate right flank, which he could have overwhelmed, but because of his timidity and so forth, he doesn't. And Burnside's not there to say, go get him. Even though the Federals break through, Franklin does not support that breakthrough that was achieved by George Gordon Meade in this little swampy area along the Confederate lines. That's where Maxcy Gregg is going to be killed. Anyway, so I hope that answers your question. So he is very brave. And in fact, I think the bravest thing he does during the whole campaign is when he is coming down with the transports. He moves himself from a much bigger ship onto this smaller ship, the Pickett. And here they are in terrible storms, and he's moving the Pickett to ship to say, don't worry. I think in the last program, we had a picture of Burnside, up in the rigging, showing how brave he is. And don't worry, man, we will make it. So Burnside understood that type of leadership. It's just that he's got to have a smaller group of men.
A couple of questions here about poor, pitiful, skinny Moses. His age, you estimated at what during that picture? I mean, he looks like a
well, he's a
child.
graduate of West Point. He went to William and Mary as a prep school, basically. William and Mary was lessening in its intellectual rank, and so he went there in 52. So he was probably anywhere from 14 to 16 years old when he goes there in 52. So if he's, let's say, 15 years old when he goes to William and Mary, you add 10 years, he's 25.
Wow.
He does look like a boy. He was a very sickly individual, and his epilepsy was a tremendous hindrance. He will be reassigned to the Vicksburg defenses, which was a good job for Moses White. White knew what he was doing. White makes a couple of mistakes during the siege. Number one, he tells his battery commanders, tell me what you're going to do and I'll approve you doing it. They all went to him and says, look, we're losing 10 minutes. Sometimes the Federals are there. We should shoot them right away. So he says, okay, you do what you think is best. But then he finds out that in one of his units, he's got this guy who was a pre-war baker. And so he orders him that, no, we're not going to issue flour to the individual troops. We're going to bake the stuff in our oven. Well, the baker was not a good baker. He burned the bread. And so everyone's in a bad mood and finally go to Moses White saying, you got to get rid of him. We want to have our own rations. And Moses White says, well, yes, you can do that. And I don't know what happens to the baker. In fact, I didn't see a mention of his name in the official records. So Moses White, after Fort Macon, goes to Vicksburg because he goes back home. His parole's over. He joins Pemberton's army at Vicksburg, and he will die in June of 1863 in an epileptic fit.
Well, that answers two questions from two of our viewers. So thank you for that, John. Lauren is asking, was there ever an inquiry about how the blockade squadron allowed the Nashville to escape?
Oh, yes. You saw, wait a second. This is made by Courier and Ives. It was so embarrassing that they printed these things as a cartoon and you could buy them saying, we're going to lose the war. So Wells is really pretty upset. He blames Goldsborough, and Goldsborough is going to be eventually replaced as commander of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron by Samuel P. Lee, a cousin of R.E. Lee. So anyway, he is, so that is because Whittle is such an excellent person. So here he is coming out of Beaufort at dusk, and there are these two ships guarding. He looks like the state of Georgia. So I don't know why the Federals thought a ship coming from inside Bogue Bank towards them is going to be the state of Georgia, but at first they don't fire because they think it is. So when Whittle gets on top of him, he says, look, I'm either going to ram them down and sink both ships, or they're going to give way. And they gave way. The Gembuck is a sailing ship. It can do nothing. The Cambridge is poorly armed, but Nashville has no cannon on board it at this time. And so it's just its speed is going to get it to pass by there. And so the Federals, this was a big complaint that many people made against Gideon Wells. When the war breaks out and we declare the blockade of the southern coastline, well, the U.S. Navy only has 29 steamers out of 93 ships. Of those 93 ships, half of them are rotten hulks. So what are they going to do? They're going to go buy ferry boats. They build these 90-day gunboats. They're in a rush. Some of the boats they buy are so bad that they have to rebuild them and so forth. So these unscrupulous people are war profiteers who are selling boats to the U.S. Navy and to the U.S. Army. So initially, it's all about the acquisition of ships. And that takes the U.S. Navy a considerable amount of time to actually find the right ships for the right purposes. The Commodore Perry is not a good ship for blockade duty. The Commodore Perry is great for service on the inland sea. And that's where it serves best.
Peter asked, Generals O'Branch, Reno, Rodman, and Burnside would participate in the Antietam campaign. With the exception of Burnside, the others would be killed during the battles. How was their command transfers decided in joining the armies in Virginia, O'Branch to A.P. Hill,
Well,
Reno
basically,
and Rodman to 9 Corps?
yes. So what happens is after the defeat at New Bern, the troops that are left with Branch are going to be transferred to Virginia, because by this time, the events, we don't know what Burnside's going to do, and yet there's this huge army moving on to Richmond. So they move Branch, they assign him to the Light Division commanded by A.P. Hill. He marches his men with A.P. Hill 17 miles to show up at the Battle of Sharpsburg just at the right time. They're on, you go to the exact spot, they're up on this hill, and the Federals are moving up, and right near there is the 9th New York Hawkins Zouaves, and one sharpshooter fires. There 3 Confederate generals in a bunch, including A.P. Hill, and they fire a shot, and the shot goes through the neck of Branch, and he dies. Yeah. Reno is going to die at Cramden's Gap, I think it is, or no, Fox's Gap, at the Battle of South Mountain. So he doesn't make it to the Battle of Antietam, but it's the build up to Antietam where Reno is a very brave person, led from the front. That's why he knew the brickyard was about ready to fall. He knew that he needed more troops, fresh troops, to be able to make that breakthrough. And so Reno is at the front. You know, when you're a brigade commander, you needed to be with your brigade. You know, you don't stay behind. You are there with them. That's why 27% of Confederate generals are either killed or wounded during the Civil War. So I don't know if I'd want to be promoted. So, you know, I'm not so sure. But it's the same way with the U.S. Army. So, you know, we're weeding out people and so forth. Branch was a political general, but he was a great orator, and you know, he knew how to organize men. He just didn't understand tactics. Assigned to A.P. Hill, he didn't have to decide on tactics. He didn't have to decide on strategy. That was A.P. Hill's job, and of course, he's at that time in Jackson's Corps, so it's in Jackson's duty and Lee's duty. So, you know, he's in a pretty safe spot. So I would have to say that, yeah, it's kind of ironic that both those two men are killed at this battle, because Branch is conspicuous during the defense of New Bern. Reno is conspicuous during the attack at New Bern. So is Foster. Foster just gets lucky. And so does Burnside. Burnside is shot at because it's mentioned by his chief of staff that the bullet whizzed by him, and yeah, because these bullets, they say, sounded like bumblebees going by. You know. So anyway, what else do you want to know?
Well, if you haven't been to Fort Macon, any of you, I highly encourage it. I'm a Morehead City, North Carolina native, and I've been to Fort Macon with John, and what a wonderful place. John, you need to do a group field trip there and show it to us for real.
Yes.
And you mentioned their possibly using the sand dunes to hide behind. Well, when I was a child, they were as big as Everest. And
Without
now
a
when
doubt.
I go there, they're not that big anymore.
Well, what happened is that much of that end of Bogue Banks been taken away. Bogue Point,
Yeah.
number one, erosion. Number two, they knocked down to build the resort Atlantic Beach. Hop Hole Creek is down. I think if you go to a Burger King down Salter Path, near Salter Path, that's where the landing is. And you can actually, in that parking, I think it's a Burger King.
No, it's Hardee's.
It's a Hardee's, okay. And you go right down to the swamp where the Federals landed.
Yep.
And so, yeah, the topography has changed quite a bit because of ill-advised development. But
Definitely.
no, the dunes, and there's still some pretty vicious dunes there.
Sure.
And so I've been there a lot. And, once this COVID stuff breaks, I'll be very happy to take you all. It would require an overnight tour because we would have to, we also want to go to Plymouth, Edenton, Halifax, Beaufort, Fort Macon, Kinston.
It'd be a fabulous trip. So
yeah, Kinston has an ironclad. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's right. The Neuse.
That's right. The most, I'm proud that I've seen what's left of every Civil War era ironclad. So, that was one of my punch lists.
We have a couple more questions.
Okay.
John can talk about anything. So you've had a request here. Could you do a virtual lecture about the Battle of the Argonne Forest?
Sure. Not very difficult. I mean, it'd take me about an hour to tell. That was the offensive that, these are Americans because, I'm not, if that is a formal request, then I certainly will entertain that, not in the Civil War series, but maybe we'll do a special lecture on that someday next year, because I'm already booked pretty heavily this year. And in fact, I barely have time to write my blogs.
That's right.
My blog last time was 7,000 words. This one is almost 5,000 words. So, and also I have to write other things. So I'm writing about 15 to 20,000 words a month. So that's why I'm bald. That's why I have a martini every Friday night, so I don't know what to say, but yeah, I mean,
we'll put it on our list.
Yeah.
We'll definitely put it on the suggested list. So thank you for the suggestion. And Peter asked our final question. Why were there no attempts to take Wilmington early on in the war?
Oh my gosh, there was. And what it was that Burnside was given the option of going against Goldsboro or Wilmington. Also, Gideon Wells had decided that they were going to capture Wilmington using monitors. And so, that's all great. And he said, we're going to go behind these forts like Fort Caswell and the beginning of Fort Fisher. We'll bombard them. We'll capture Wilmington and we'll close that port. The trouble is all of those monitors had too great of a draft to go into New Inlet or Old Inlet. And so that's why the Monitor was heading towards Beaufort, North Carolina, to participate in the attack or the planned attack on Wilmington. So yes, they thought about it. Yes, they should have done it then. But the Federals have the Federals have a lot of difficulty in their high command. Okay, and for a wide variety of reasons. And which is another whole story, but it is yes, they made a big mistake. But see, Wilmington at first wasn't the greatest port to go into in 61. It wasn't until the blockade was really established in Savannah and Charleston that the alternative became Wilmington, and they started to purpose-built blockade runners that could make it through the shallow drafts of both old and new inlet. And I think I gave a program last year sometime about the defenses of the Cape Fear.
You did.
And maybe I can do it again if you all didn't. I don't think we were taping them then. That was at the very beginning of COVID.
Yeah, I don't think so, but we could put that back on our list too, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, John. This was fabulous. Thank all of you for attending today. John will speak about the Battle of Memphis on May 7th at noon. And we're excited that the museum will be reopening to the public on May 28th. But fear not, we will continue these virtual programs because we get to reach so many of you that aren't right here in Hampton Roads. So
yeah, I just want to add one thing, Julie. The Battle of Memphis is actually a two-part battle. The Battle of Plum Point Bend, and then the Battle of Memphis. And it's all because of the Confederate River Defense Fleet that those two battles happened. And I won't tell you the outcome of either one, but it's a pretty good story, and they're brief engagements. So yeah,
it's not going to be a brief blog, though, is it?
Sadly, you know, if you have to footnote a story and you have to really tell it completely, it gets complex. And so we made a decision here for me to do these very thorough blogs. It's not, I just write down and think what I think.
Right.
You know, I actually, you know, I have a set of official records at home, and you know, I really kind of scour them. I, you know, have all this other stuff. So I guess my personal library just down here in Hampton is about 5,000 books. So
At least, yeah.
At least, yeah. I never counted them. Take too long to do that.
But we appreciate you, John, and all of you for your nice comments today and for viewing with us. And as Tim said at the beginning, tell your friends about next Saturday. You can see this program on our YouTube channel. So with that, we'll sign off for this week and see you next time. Thank you.
Peace and love.